Jayne here. Now, one of the first places to start when you've been diagnosed with IBS is to take a good look at your eating habits. And whilst I certainly don't believe that food is the enemy and you're going to be condemned to a permanent diet of tea and toast, taking a closer look both at what you are eating and how you are eating will provide you with some very valuable clues as to how to get your bowel and IBS symptoms under control. So in this video, I'm going to help show you how you can take a closer look at the link between the food you're eating and your physical IBS symptoms, whether that's gut pain, bloating, diarrhea, or constipation. Now, by the end of this video, my hope is that you'll stop being afraid of mealtimes and instead start to get a fresh understanding of how the food you're eating and the way you're eating is impacting upon your body. Now, for those of you who are new to my channel, my name is Jayne, and as a psychotherapist, gut-directed hypnotherapist, and wellness coach, I help people with Irritable Bowel Syndrome beat their symptoms long-term without restrictive diets and without using medication for the rest of their lives. So if you want to learn more about taking back control over your IBS, then definitely make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Okay, let's dive in. Now, when it comes to IBS and food, it's very easy to start feeling afraid of mealtimes, worrying about what you can and what you can't eat, and literally dreading what's to come after you've eaten something that perhaps you think you shouldn't have eaten. Your life, unfortunately, can become consumed by your IBS and thoughts around food. You may even feel like you'd rather just go hungry than potentially trigger your IBS. And look, I totally get it because I've been there, and preferring to go hungry than potentially paying the price of severe gut pain always felt like the easiest option. But here's the thing, although it's true that certain foods can trigger or exacerbate IBS symptoms, with a little knowledge, research and planning, you can discover which foods are helpful and which are best avoided. And to do this, I recommend you start keeping what I call a food and symptom diary. Now, the key thing to remember as I walk you through the 6 steps I take my clients through is that if you do discover issues with a food now, you may likely find that when your digestive system starts to calm down and settle, that you can eat that food again at a later date with no issues. Also remember to keep mealtimes stress-free and rush-free. Now, these things will help to reduce your IBS symptoms because when it comes to food, it's not just what you are eating, it's how and when you are eating too. Okay, step 1 of tracking your physical IBS symptoms and food is to create your food diary template, which you can do in a notepad or blank piece of paper. You can also record on your phone, or I've had clients keep a template on their laptop using Excel or a Word document, for example. So what do you include in this template? Okay, so you want to divide your template into columns and write down the following information for each day that you're keeping a food and symptom diary. So firstly, you want to record the time that you experience your IBS symptoms, the stress, or the time that you ate. Secondly, you want to record the symptoms that you experience. Now, pain, diarrhea, constipation, or bloating. And you want to include a severity score next to each of these from 1 to 3, where 1 is mild and 3 is severe. Now, in the third column, you're going to rate your stress level. This is important at the time of eating or experiencing your IBS symptoms. Again, keeping it really simple using a scale from 1 to 3, where 1 is mild and 3 is severe. Now, it's also helpful to write down the type of stress being experienced. For example, if you're having a fight with your partner, or there's a busy deadline at work that's changed, or you're feeling anxious because you have to give a presentation in front of lots of people, then make sure you write that down too. Now, finally, column 4, you're going to write down everything you eat and drink for that day. Be specific as possible, including the serving size. This information will help to reveal the patterns and possible trigger foods. So go ahead and let me know down in the comments if you have kept a food diary in the past and what type of information you recorded. Okay, step number 2. How does a food diary work? Now, you want to be keeping your food diary for around 2-3 weeks. So you're going to build up a really good picture of both your physical IBS symptoms and your food intake and your food habits. Now, it's really important before you start labeling foods as good or bad or troublesome that you make sure your symptoms are not due to other things. Now, these can be things like stress and emotional upset when you have been eating or before you've been eating. Also things such as eating a large heavy meal, which can trigger something called the gastrocolic reflex, which can trigger IBS symptoms. Also, eating too quickly or rushing meal times or having them on the go can also exaggerate and trigger IBS. Now, step 3 is the common pitfalls to look out for. Now, there are 2 common pitfalls you need to be aware of when keeping a food diary. Now, if you're not aware of them, they run the risk of triggering further food anxiety, so it's super important to be aware of them. Okay, now the first one is to watch out for what I call black and white labeling of foods. This means resisting the urge to label a food as good or bad. Now, the problem with labeling food in this way is that you can start to feel hopeless, experience that feeling of self-pity and resentment towards yourself and your IBS, which, let's be honest, isn't helpful. And as I just mentioned, if you do identify a certain food as troublesome, it does not necessarily mean that you can never have that food again. Pitfall number 2 is panicking after you've eaten a food which you think you shouldn't have eaten. Now, this of course triggers anxiety and something called hypervigilance about the effect it's going to have on your digestive system. Now, the irony here is that these types of thoughts and this type of thinking actually causes the very same IBS flare-up that you wanted to avoid in the first place. So keeping your thoughts in check is a really valuable strategy here and being aware of what's going on inside of your head. Okay, step number 4 is being aware of the common culprits when it comes to IBS food triggers. And not just being aware, but also understanding why they are triggering your IBS symptoms. You see, knowledge is power, my friend, and understanding the reasons, the underlying reasons behind these foods and your IBS will dramatically increase your sense of control over your symptoms. You see, some foods just have a reputation for irritating the intestines, particularly spicy or gassy foods. Now, once you have your IBS symptoms under control, you may find that you can eat these types of foods with no issues. But when your gut is far from the happy place or you're undergoing extreme stress or a flare-up, the following are best avoided until you get your gut back on track. So the common culprits are the following. So the first one is the gas-producing vegetables, which fall into 2 categories. So your category 1 is legumes, such as beans and lentils, and category 2 are things like cruciferous vegetables, so broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower. Now, the next category is sugars and artificial sweeteners. For example, fructose and sorbitol. So things like chewing gum, for example, are not recommended if you're having an IBS flare-up. Dairy is next. So lactose is a sugar found in milk and dairy products, and it's actually estimated that 40% of IBS sufferers are lactose intolerant. Next up, we have wheat products. Now, these fall into 2 camps. We have refined, so more processed wheat products, and then we have unrefined products. Fatty foods is another trigger for IBS, along with caffeine and alcohol. So let's move on to step number 5, which is understanding your food diary and creating your very own personal food guide. Now, after about 3 weeks of keeping a food and symptom diary, you should have enough information to identify some patterns and foods which are friendly to your digestive system and foods that perhaps aren't so friendly. So once you have your diary in front of you, I want you to go through and ask the following questions so you can start to get a much better understanding of what's happening within your body. Question 1, which foods look like they are making my symptoms worse? Question 2, is there any evidence of lactose intolerance from dairy? Question 3, do I have difficulties with wheat products? And remember to look at refined versus unrefined wheat products. Next question, do certain vegetables trigger my symptoms? Next question, when I experienced a flare-up of symptoms, what was my stress level score before and during eating? How was I feeling emotionally? Next up, when I experience a flare-up of my IBS, how large were my meal sizes? Did I have a big break between meals? How far were my meals spaced apart? Now, I want you to become a detective when it comes to your symptoms. And as you learn which foods you feel are safe versus troublesome, I want you to create a list of these. Now, if you are unsure about a certain food, that's completely normal, and you can just put a question mark next to that food item. And remember that just because you find a food troublesome now does not mean that you can never have that food again. Okay, the final step, step number 6, is creating a plan moving ahead. Now, as you work to change your eating habits so that you can reduce your IBS symptoms, it's also a great time to incorporate other healthy eating strategies. Now, these do not need to be complicated, and in fact, the simpler, the better. Now, it's also important to make sure that any new lifestyle changes and healthy eating strategies fit into your life, not the other way around, if they were going to be sustainable in the long term. So let's talk about what these are. First one is eat a colourful array of natural foods which are high in nutrients. I often tell my clients to make sure they're eating the colours of the rainbow, from carrots to beetroot to blueberries to tomatoes to bananas. Secondly, look at how and when you are eating and start to ask yourself, am I really hungry and do I feel full? It is amazing how much we overload our digestive system without even realising it. Next up, make your mealtimes enjoyable again and reduce the anxiety that you may have felt around food in the past. Think about introducing candles or beautiful placemats, new plates and bowls, new cutlery, and even putting on some relaxing music while you're preparing and eating your meals. Now, another great strategy is to maintain a regular schedule of meals. Eating every 4 hours can help with IBS. And trying not to overload your gut by eating small meals and slowing down when you're eating. And stop eating on the run. This is so important. So there are ways of eating even on the most busiest of schedules that do not involve you grabbing food as you're running out of the door. So I would certainly encourage you to look at, as I mentioned, the when and the how of how you're eating your food. So now you know the 6 steps to not just keeping a food and symptom diary, but what you can do with that valuable information to help you identify triggers and manage your IBS symptoms. But if you do need more help with understanding the food and symptom diary and your triggers and managing your symptoms, then my program, The Calm Gut Method, may just be the answer for you. You can learn all about the work that I do with my clients and about the Calm Gut Method by visiting my website, and you can do that by visiting the link just down below in the description. I would also love to invite you to my free Facebook group where you get to ask your questions and get advice from myself on your personal journey with IBS. Now, you can join that group by clicking the link just down below in the description. In the meantime, I will leave you with these 2 other videos with more insights, tips, and strategies to help you start living your life on your terms and not your bowels. For now, I will see you in the next video.